Grand rising, everyone. I like coming to live. Spirit and coffee. Got my coffee here. Salute and cheers to you all. Um, so yesterday, of course, Brandon did not remember. Oh, there he is. As we talk about Brandon. Let's see if we can get him on here. There he is. Invite. Boom. You're on. It's all good. It is all good.
Yo,
Good morning. Good morning, Nightfire. How are
good.
you today?
I am well. How are you?
I'm doing well. So, okay, so you didn't come on yesterday, you forgot.
Here's the thing. I hold on. I've got a reasoning in my defense.
Okay, let's
For
hear
the
it.
last 3-4 days, I've been synchronizing a client's records from one system to another, and I had to write some code to interact with the API. And so because of the nature of the API for this system, how my system interacts with it, I have to keep it live. So I wrote all these scripts so that it's like I'm behind my computer doing the synchronization, but it's just a bunch of scripts running. And while it's doing its work, I can't really do anything. So I just kind of sit there and watch my computer. So I woke up yesterday, same time I usually do, around 4 a.m. And what I did was I turned off all my alarms because my computers have just been running 24 hours a day for days on end. And I'm like, oh, well, I don't have to do anything. I'm not going to go downstairs and watch my computer. And I literally lost track of what day it was. So I was just like, I'm turn off my alarms. I don't have nothing to do today. So
Well, you know what?
that's
It sounds
that's
so
my reasoning.
fancy. That all sounds very fancy that we're just gonna be like, you're good. You're all good. The APRs and APPs and all the things, you're good.
Yeah,
I don't know
blame
about
technology. Technology.
it. Well, at the end of the day, just but it sounded very fancy, so I don't know about the tech stuff. Things I don't know. Tech, politics. Those are the 2 things I don't really. I am like the late adopter for all technology type person. I don't know what it is. I'm very slow moving. I'm like, yeah, I'm always like, "Ooh, I don't know if that's gonna fail. Let's see. Let's see all the other people pay high prices for it, and then when it's, like, cheap, I'll go get it." That's how I do things. But I
Well,
so
you've figured out podcasting. That's
Oh, yeah.
beyond most people's wheelhouse.
Is it really? Well, okay, yeah, I did, but it all started with Facebook Live, and then it just kind of
Right,
expanded from there. But
right.
Podbean
I
is
remember when you were doing the Facebook Live, and I'm like, hey, I can
actually.
help you make this
I
into
know.
a live broadcast on multiple platforms.
I know, and it would be awesome to actually do that and even expand more because I eventually had a reach stream and I had all this stuff going on. I don't really know how it worked, but we were broadcasting on YouTube and all these places, and then I just broke it down. But I have all the equipment, and I think it'd be great to just expand. And because I feel like the audience base is not necessarily where I'm at right now. And so I think tapping into the audience that, you know, because I feel so here's the deal. Speaking to these people, sometimes I'm like, well, I'm preaching to the choir, but the reality is that these individuals that maybe show up will then share this information with the people they know and all that. So hopefully it's helpful. And I'd like to at least broadcast to a wider range of individuals if possible. So there's my whole spiel. You're the tech
Right.
guy.
Well, something Gingy brought up to me yesterday, um, is that like when we have conversations, right? When him and I have discussions, he says there's something that either doesn't sit right with him or that he feels there's something wrong with, but he doesn't have the words to put with it. And when we have a discussion, it fleshes those out. It's like, now I have a concrete way of talking about this. So that's like
Uh-huh.
kind of how you can see,
Mhm.
the service that you provide through
Yeah.
through your podcast is that
Yeah.
people may be on the same wavelength as you, but they may not have an articulation for something, that they may gain some insight just from hearing a discussion around a particular subject.
That's true, and you know what? That's how I feel when we talk too, because you have that's why I had always wanted somebody to come on here with a different perspective. Of course, people aren't as committed. Number 1, they fall off all the time, and you know how that goes. And then 2, someone who at least can understand or decipher what the hell I'm saying and put it into different words. um, so, because sometimes people are like, it's I don't even know what you're saying half the time. And I'm like, well, I don't know. I mean, I talk a different language, I guess. I don't know. Or I use different words to describe things. And in fact, okay, well, here's the thing. So I told you I was talking about non-ordinary states of consciousness. I'm actually, so I'm in my master's program. The program that I'm in is consciousness and transformative studies, and the class that I'm taking is non-ordinary states of consciousness. That is the class. And so last night I was writing my discussion log, and the professor's like, write an experience of a non-ordinary state. And it's funny because I had actually had the experience, and I actually had talked to you about the experience, and you did give me some language that helped me to maybe describe what was going on, because I literally felt like I was viewing the world like a program. It was just the weird I can't even I just didn't have words, and I just still don't have words to describe the experience. But I remember, like, you're like, "Oh, yeah, take it back to, like, masters." When we took the master's course, it's like, "Oh, you were the context, I mean, and then everything else was the content." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I guess that those were the words that actually described it," where it was like I described it like programming, like I could see the program running. I could see how people were like the program in this, like, it was just weird. I was just sitting there, and it was like I knew the function of everybody in my life, and they would just show up, pop in and pop out, pop in and pop out. And I'm like, and I just didn't have the words to describe it. And then coming back into like the 3D world, right? Back into consciousness, then it was like going through a birth. Like I think what birth would feel like, because it was scary. Like, I wasn't afraid when I was actually feeling like the context, but when I was coming back into, like, what I would call, quote, unquote, "reality," it was actually scary for me. So, I would imagine that's what it feels like coming into the into this world. Maybe that's why babies cry, because it was a whole experience having to come back into the world, the waking world. And there was like this fear when I was transitioning back into my ordinary state of consciousness. It was really, just there wasn't words. But then trying to describe the experience, maybe like to you and the way you hear it, right? And then the words that you have to describe it, and the language and all that you have to describe it. And it helped me. So I was writing about this last night, and even speaking about it, I think getting better language even around it, right? Being able to really kind of describe it. And then I think that that's helpful, because then it gives like this whole new spirits do that. Yeah. I think that it allows for people to kind of understand this new way or perspective of seeing the world. Like we bring back this information that like we don't know what we don't know. And that's kind of what I was talking about yesterday as well. Anyway, go ahead. Tell me what you hear or what you're thinking.
Well, first of all, you got to lay off that DMT. Just joking.
It's
Um,
natural. I don't know what to say.
but actually, Gingy and I did do a discussion on this on phenomenosophy. I believe it's the episode Beyond the Veil.
Mhm,
I
mhm,
summarize it all as the ecstatic experience,
uh-huh,
and it's like bridging what we consider the metaphysical or paranormal with that, what you call, or what you're calling in the course, or what they call in the course, the normal states of consciousness.
right.
And I believe it's something that we achieve through multiple means. Sometimes we just fall into it. It just
Yeah.
occurs. Other times it can be achieved through breathing exercises, forms of meditation. Of course, you can elicit it through the use
Mhm,
of DMT, ayahuasca, LSD, mushrooms. Like these are all things that elicit the ecstatic experience.
Mhm. Mhm.
And in the ecstatic experience, you're definitely not in that quote unquote ordinary consciousness. You have an expanded consciousness, right? So you have an
Mhm.
expanded awareness, expanded consciousness, and in that state, you can you can have insights, right?
Yes. Mhm.
Insights regarding the nature of reality, the nature of the universe, the nature of your own being. So it's a useful place to be. And typically when I just talk about these things, the there are philosophies that talk about states like this. Like in Buddhism, they have the concept of nirvana,
Mhm.
and many Buddhists see it as like, oh, that's where you want to be. And I'm like, well, not if you're in this world.
Nope.
um, because if you're in that state, you really aren't in the game anymore.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, yes,
and
that's
and
very true.
and again, that may sound appealing to some, like, oh yeah, I want to get out of the game. But you're here playing a game, and if you look at what is described as, the state of nirvana or the ecstatic experience from any means, you're in a state where the lower level interactions and exchanges um, make little to no sense or take on a significance that can't be articulated to someone in an ordinary consciousness. Like typically when people have these types of experiences, they have exactly what you described as like, I can't even explain this. you know,
Yeah,
I don't have the
there's
words.
words. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have the words to convey the experience. And so making those pilgrimages to those states of consciousness every once in a while, I think are useful and powerful, but you can't really live in that state of consciousness, not in this world. That may be the state of consciousness for other levels of existence or being, but it's not conducive to, you got to pay your bills, you got to eat, you
I
got to eat,
know.
you got to
Mhm.
you got to have shelter, you got to do all these things. And it's important, to perpetuate the species and things like that. So it becomes like I think it's a place like where if you look at ancient culture and shamanistic cultures, this is the shaman's role for the
Yep.
tribe, is to
Uh-huh.
go into these states and
Yep.
to bring back wisdom. And then he's able to convey that wisdom to the people in the tribe, right? And so he's looked at as a wise man, he's looked at as a healer. He talks to plants and things like that. And in his discussions with plants, he learns about the plants. He can gain insight in this non-ordinary consciousness about the plants in the forest, right?
Yep.
So it's useful. And in our ancient cultures all around the world, we saw it as necessary. We needed at least one person going there on a regular basis.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And it's funny because I did talk about that yesterday. I did talk about shamans as well, and how they utilize this and we don't now. And I absolutely agree that we can't stay there. And coming back was actually painful. It really strange. And I didn't realize that it was I felt like it was a death, maybe like a rebirth into a new so expanded consciousness, right? I think because I came back with information, but what I notice when I go into those states is that I bring back symbols. So there's not really words, but symbols. And symbols are kind of the way that I communicate what happened to me. And then, so I think that that's the way, kind of like, we would say like the fractals and the patterning and all that kind of stuff. So I bring back that information, but I don't necessarily have the words to describe, what happened. And so I can use I can pull from different like words and like I would say a computer program, right? I was watching a program happen while I just sat there and it was like I understood the function of individuals, like that's relatable. Or if we did the content and context that makes sense. that actually makes a lot more sense because it was, like, just pouring out of me, right? It was like but I knew that I couldn't stay there, and how I got there, I have no idea. I wasn't it's not like I was taking I didn't take anything or it was just it was a weird time. I think it was during COVID, and I think that I was just, around individuals who were we were talking a lot about spirituality, spiritual alchemy, and then I just think I slowly started to transition into it, and it was just the strangest thing. But coming back, um, it's almost like I had to find my way through a maze back to reality. That's how I felt. I mean, that's probably the best way to describe it. And it was like all the stuff that I understood, like breathing and my heart. And I was like, the transmutation centers in the heart, like bring myself back to the heart because I was like panicking coming back. It was a weird transition back into reality. And then I didn't
So
realize
you
that
were
until I
dragged.
was I was what?
You were dragged, kicking and screaming,
Yeah,
"No!"
I know. Yeah, in a way, I was. I was like, but I didn't know how to transition back. I mean, it was pretty intense, and it was intense, even more intense because it's not like I was on some kind of like, you know, I was taking something. I didn't have to take anything to get there. It was the first time ever that I had experienced anything like this ever in my life. Um, and then there was a time where I was feeling like almost like the Matrix, like I was laying there and I felt myself as another creature, another being, and it almost was like I was gonna get pulled into that and pulled away from here. That too was kind of scary. Now I don't even know how to describe that, experience.
Right, and that's something that you must be mindful of. That's why it's like I often will tell people like, look, it's not for everyone. You must definitely be strong-minded and strong-willed because there is that unseen world, whether we reference it as metaphysical, whether we reference it as paranormal, but you can open yourself up to the influence of disembodied beings and things of that nature by going into these states.
Mhm,
So if you're not of the right constitution, so to speak, it may
mhm,
not be a good idea to explore these states of consciousness because you open yourself up. And in fact, a lot of people report this type of experience or phenomenon where it's like they had an ayahuasca experience or something of that nature, and now they have this presence, right,
mm,
that
mhm,
seems to be with them, that seems to be separate from them. And this presence can have influence, right? It can
mhm,
influence your
mhm,
thoughts, it can influence your actions. If you had uh, the eyes to see, you may see that there's actually these beings all around us, and they're constantly whispering in the ears of the people around you, influencing them.
mhm,
And
mhm, mhm.
it's something to be mindful of. That it's
Absolutely.
uh,
I wasn't even
yeah,
trying to do it. It's not like I went out there and said, "Hey, let's go have a whole journey." It was just a weird time for me. And in fact
right. Well, emotional states can elicit it as well. It doesn't
uh-huh,
take a
yes,
substance. An emotional
that's
state
true.
can elicit that kind of an experience.
Yes, and it was. And at that time and I haven't even talked about it, right? I'm just being very like open right now about everything because I typically don't go into all this, but I think it's important. It literally was there was an exorcism that did happen, and that I think part of it as well, where it was a release of this energy from my sister who she felt she was like possessed by this thing her whole entire life, right? And or this energy. And I think that it was really strange because it was like, God, I don't know, Brandon. It was such a weird experience. Like I could see these time loops happening as well, where I felt trapped in time, and it was almost like deja vu, right? It just kept like happening. Like for instance, I'll just give you an example. And this happened. I was downstairs. My sister was super sick. She was throwing up. I mean, it was awful. She couldn't stop throwing up. And I thought she was going to die. I think she looked like she was like close to death. And so My mom would go upstairs, she'd come back down, she'd go to the freezer, she'd open the door, she'd put ice in the cup, the ice would drop, she would pick it up, put it in the sink, and that, like, kept happening over and over and over. And I was like, "Oh my god, I'm, like, stuck in this time loop." It was I swear that entire time was just such a strange occurrence. And I was like, "How do I need to get out of this time trap. Like, I need to leave. I need to literally get out of this house and go somewhere else because I'm stuck in this." And it was just the same thing. She would go up the stairs, come down, go get ice, drop the ice, da, 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 and it just kept happening over and over and over. And I was like, "What the hell am I experiencing right now?" So it
Well,
was just
that's perfect. That's actually a perfect representation
uh-huh,
of the duality. It's really a microcosmic representation of the duality of the cyclical,
uh-huh,
infinite system of experience and consciousness and the linear experience of consciousness. So it's something that is always present. There's no getting out. You're in both, right?
uh-huh,
So for instance, in your normal, we'll call it waking consciousness,
mhm,
you're linear, right?
mhm,
So there's beginning and end. Things move in a line, or I should say
mhm, mhm.
time moves in one direction, right?
Yeah.
But in the cyclical, because again, everything is polarized, right? So the polarity of linear existence is cyclical, right? It's
Uh-huh.
it's an infinite loop, and so you're used to that in what we call the non-waking consciousness, right? The dream state.
Right.
If you notice, like I don't know if you've done um, lucid dreaming, right? Where you're
Uh-huh.
fully
Yep.
aware that
Yep.
you're in the dream state, right? Well,
Yes.
you'll notice in that world, you have the
Mhm.
capacity to just be anywhere by willing it, right?
Yep.
And so this is a different type of universe, we'll say. The laws of the linear existence that we have in our waking consciousness don't apply,
Mhm.
and vice versa. But you see, that's the duality. You're living in both worlds.
Yep.
You spend your sleeping consciousness in one world, and you spend your waking consciousness in another. And it's so you don't lose your sea legs, so to speak, because your existence is infinite, right? If you're energetic, if you have a soul, if you have a spirit, it is by the nature of energy cannot be created or destroyed. It is an infinite thing. It goes on and on and on. And so understanding both the linear and the cyclical, right? The
Mhm. Mhm.
finite and the
Mhm.
infinite.
Mhm.
These are
Mhm.
things that are these are polarizations of not only consciousness but of being. And so in understanding those and experiencing those, you develop some wisdom around it. So it's interesting that it's really what it was an unfamiliarity that in waking consciousness you don't usually experience things cyclically, you know but
Mm,
it's
mhm.
important to recognize that it's happening all around you all the time. I think a
Mhm.
great metaphor for it um, was that movie. Oh, I'm gonna forget the name. The one with
The nines?
uh, no, no,
Well,
no, no,
then
the one with
oh,
Halle Berry and Tom
oh,
Hanks.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
Cloud Atlas. Cloud
yes,
Atlas.
yes, 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 yes,
Okay,
caught up.
so what I mean, that's a good metaphor because if you watch the movie, like especially if you take kind of like the full spectrum view, the 30,000 foot view, what's happening, right? And Cloud Atlas is a composition, right? It's a song, right?
Mhm, mhm,
And what you're seeing is all these different cycles that are lining up and crescendoing together, right? So
mhm,
it's again, it's kind of telling a linear story, but it's also at the same time because it's moving between different cycles, but it's showing how all the different cycles line up together. Like you watch how it, rather
mhm,
than seeing it as like this linear thing of like, oh, past lives, present life, future life kind of thing, rather than seeing it linearly, you're seeing that all these things are occurring together. And when they all crescendo together, right?
Mm,
So
okay.
in having a way of in perceiving things that way, you can see like the cycles of like let's say the broader cycles of what we're experiencing as a civilization, as a society. You're seeing that these things, they always say that if you don't learn history, you're bound to repeat it, right?
Mhm,
Well,
mhm,
it's because we move in these cycles, and rather than it necessarily being linear, there is the linear aspect and we can perceive it linearly, but it can also be seen as moving through cycles together simultaneously at the same time. So, just like we saw the collapse of civilizations in the past and what led up to it and what was happening in society and what was happening in culture and how were people thinking and how were people acting and how that's repeating, right? So it's like
mhm.
these cycles are moving together, we're repeating it, and it's cyclical, although we can step out of it and see it as something linear. So it's important to be able to grasp it in both senses. And it's not that one is right and the other is wrong, or one is true and the other is false. They go together. The linear
Yeah.
experience with the cyclical experience they go together. They're not something you can separate from each other.
Yeah, okay, so and that's kind of see, that's why I like using or getting other perspectives because that kind of makes sense. It's like almost like maybe or perhaps whatever, like you said, the crescendo, maybe this was happening in some other dimension, time, space, in my other existence as another human being or whatever the heck it is. My energy is expanding out and however, all coming to a head at the same time. And who knows, maybe at that particular moment in time, it was the same thing going on. Like the same thing was happening, but it was different, but the same. And it felt like the
Right.
same. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I could see it from that perspective because, I was like, I'm in this time loop that I'm just, like, trapped in this time loop that continued it was just a continued thing, and I was like, "Oh my god, like, how do I get out of this weird, like, loop that I'm in?" Um, and it was interesting, and you're right, because I mean, patterns do sort of kind of play out and over and over and over again. We see it, right? It's just a different perspective on the pattern or whatever, but it was just a trip. I mean, that whole experience during that whole time, and it was during COVID. I felt like I was on honestly, like I was on shrooms or I was like somebody must have spiked my punch. What was going on? Because it wasn't like I was and it was emotional state. I think you hit it right there. I think it was my emotions that was actually eliciting that or non-ordinary states of consciousness or the ecstatic, I think is what you called it, because um, because I couldn't point to what it was that was actually causing this to happen.
Right.
And then out of that, what I brought back was a lot of anxiety afterwards because everything was changing. And since then, I have literally felt like I went through a death and a rebirth where I'm the same but different. Like I'm not the same me. Like um I learned from that experience and I was able to actually get a little bit closer to my what I call my divine birthright, doing the things that I love, getting weeding out the stuff that I know is toxic and not necessarily driving me in the direction that I need to go. And so it was pretty good, but it was very painful to go through. It was not fun. Um, it was part of it was kind of scary. There was a lot of unknown and, and then also feeling like I was going to get trapped like you said. I didn't want to be trapped. Like I am fine being here. I didn't want to be trapped in this space that I mean, I'm human right now. Like, yeah, I'll wait for that to happen when I transition into my next, state of being or whatever. But at that moment, I was like, what do I do? How do I how do I navigate this? But courage, I was brave, I'm willing to go through the fire if I have to. And I did, but I'm not going to say that I wasn't afraid because I was totally in a state of like, what the hell is this? Crazy
Right.
wild. And I think everybody kind of felt it too. And everybody was kind of in that state that was around me as well. But it did change the entire dynamics of my family, and now we're operating completely different. So, pretty intense. It was pretty intense. But thank
Yeah.
you for, like, giving me that understanding, because, yeah, with Cloud Atlas, I do see that, like, spiral effect, and what I call the language I use, and I don't know how you think about it, but I always feel like this waking world is more like what we would call classical physics, and then, like, I always think the dream world's like quantum physics, right? Where there's no laws. It's kinda like you don't know what the hell's going on. You're everywhere, nowhere, and everything and nothing all at the same time, in your dreams. Um, so tell me what you think about that. Like, can physics maybe give language to the experience? What do
In a way, and I mean, keep in mind that quantum physics is actually a system of laws and rules as well. So I don't know if necessarily. I think the way we have to look at science in general, and I
Uh-huh,
I mentioned this a little bit in one of our previous calls, um, that science is a tool that can get
uh-huh,
us closer to the truth, right?
right.
So a true scientist realizes and understands that nothing about science is true, that you're constantly evolving and moving towards truth. And so that it's definitely got a language, and you can
Mhm,
talk about strings and things like that, and dimensions and multiverse, and like these are now all concepts that are starting to show up
mhm,
in various scientific conversations, at least in the theoretical
right,
sciences.
sure.
um, I'd say that there's a benefit to speaking about it, or having a conversation about it in those terms, but there's also a benefit to having a discussion around the the phenomenon itself and the
Mhm,
experience,
mhm,
without the need to apply scientific
mhm,
theories.
mhm,
So
mhm,
it's I'd say it's valuable in both ways, that yes, you can use try to use science. Here's what's interesting to me, and I plan on doing a podcast on this, and actually I might even write a book on this, but it's the what I call the paranormal phenomenon as the missing link.
mhm,
And I see that and what I mean by that is that it's like a missing link in connecting and bringing together science and religion and various
mhm,
philosophies,
mhm,
um, because the metaphysical, which manifests as paranormal phenomenon, for many people, like the people have these experiences, right?
mhm,
And whether it be ghosts uh, or UFOs or whatever it is, like these,
mhm.
or Bigfoot, or
Yeah,
whatever you
yeah.
come across, right? These can all be considered paranormal phenomena, and they all kind of have these hallmarks which distinguish them, um, for as far as the awareness and the consciousness of the person experiencing the phenomenon.
Mhm,
And if you rather than see our current worldview, and I'm not going to say many scientists' worldview is one of a materialistic, mechanistic
mhm,
universe,
mhm.
right? So they can't explain consciousness other than their the way they want to explain it, because they
Yeah,
see man as a machine, they see the
right,
universe as a machine. So they want to explain it as, oh, chemical reactions in the brain.
right.
um, and that's hardly a, 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 an adequate explanation, right?
Yeah.
and and so so what they do is they completely dismiss any and all paranormal phenomena. And again, not all, because there are some good scientists out there like Rupert Sheldrake, who that's all they look at is paranormal phenomenon, and they apply the scientific method to it.
Yep.
So they're looking at ESP and telekinetics and things like that, and they're showing that there is this scientific basis to it, and it's not even exclusively a human phenomenon.
Right.
There's the consciousness of dogs is beyond our understanding.
Yeah.
How is a dog knows when you're heading home and you're, 50 miles away. And all of a
Right.
sudden, your dog is getting all excited because he knows you're coming home.
Right.
That can't be explained through physics.
Right. Right. Right.
So that's a paranormal phenomenon at this point, right? So it's when religion and science recognize that, okay, yes, there are these experiences and they are valid experiences, not to necessarily say how people interpret the experiences are factual or
Yeah.
truthful. We just have to recognize that it's
Yes.
happening, right? It's
Yes.
happening. And
Uh-huh.
then that can kind of be the point, because even religion rejects much of the paranormal experience.
Yeah.
If they can't fit it into the context of their belief system, they just reject it. Same with science. Science
Mm.
has their belief system, and if they can't fit it into the context of their belief system, they reject it. So you have, and again, I told you on the previous call that I see both science and religion as absolute necessities for human development. They're both tools that move us towards the truth, right? They
Yes.
get us closer to
Absolutely.
the truth.
Yep.
And that why I call the paranormal the missing link is because it's this thing that's rejected by both, but really is a manifestation of both, meaning they both have ways of connecting to it. They both have ways of explaining it, but if you take into account the
But they deny
worldview.
it.
What's that?
I said, but they deny it.
Yeah, well, it's funny because that's why I said, one of what I consider a great scientist who actually does look at the paranormal is Rupert Sheldrake. And what's interesting about Rupert Sheldrake is he's not stuck in the mechanistic, materialistic worldview that many
Uh-huh.
scientists are.
Yep.
He's very
Mhm.
spiritual. He's a very spiritual scientist. See,
Mhm.
he's bridging the divide there.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
The
Uh-huh.
paranormal is something he's always willing to look at. And so
Yeah.
that it's this bridge that can really get us to a place of a much deeper understanding of the nature of reality and consciousness. And people like him are moving us there. And if we start to recognize the value of all of
Mhm.
of spiritual philosophies, of science, and of the paranormal phenomenon and experience of the individual, and sometimes groups, like the Fatima
Mhm. Yeah.
situation, where
Yeah.
you literally had hundreds of people experiencing a paranormal phenomenon, something that can't be explained by science. Science will just say, "Oh, mass hallucination." Explain to me in detail, because you can't just write it off as mass hallucination. Explain to me in detail how hundreds of people see a woman floating in the sky, or watch the sun get blacked out or whatever, and it wasn't, uh,
An
you have to
eclipse.
go beyond that, because
Yeah.
that doesn't explain it. You're just labeling it, but it doesn't truly explain how a multitude of people can have an experience of something that your science currently can't explain. And see,
Yep.
that's the many scientists just they want to believe, because they're not real scientists. They want to believe that we've covered all the bases.
Yep. I
We
agree.
can explain everything with our current theories, with our current laws. We can explain it all, and they really can't. I mean,
No.
we're still like babies, when
I
it comes to this idea.
we totally are like babies. And my program, it talks a lot about that. Like, how do we bridge the two? Because where I'm headed, it's parapsychology, right? Like that's where it comes from, and transformation and all that stuff. So we do go into all of those, and we call alter states of consciousness. They're trying to give name to them, but a lot of it is how do we bridge the gap between the two? But science just doesn't like honestly, and what I've heard by professors too is like, well, you don't necessarily want to go get a PhD in parapsychology because, they're like, it really isn't seen as a science. You know what I mean? Or it's made fun of, or it's laughed at, or, they don't take it seriously. Um, they don't want to look at it.
Right.
Scientists want to have, like you said, that mechanistic worldview. But here's the deal, and I think it's pretty cool because as you know, like we're transitioning from paradigms, right? From one to another to the other. And I think that so we have the obviously where it's the holistic kind of approach, the integration, Ken Wilber's, all that stuff that he's done. But then we also have like living systems. And I don't know, there's a movie. I don't know if you've seen it. I think you would love it. And I think it's something that you would kind of like. It's a woman who takes this man through the different paradigms, like modern, postmodern. She talks about the mechanistic, then she talks about the integral, then she talks about like living systems and how living systems are kind of where we're headed, or where I feel has the most potential to maybe hold the context for that dialogue to happen, like the paranormal and the religion and the science coming together and having the dialogue and transitioning between the two, because it's really focused on natural law, like things that we can't explain. Like I always tell people, like, this is how I explain it. I'm like, first of all, because who's making my heart beat? Like I'm not making it beat. You can say it's the system, but I didn't create the heart and I didn't create my body. Like it just happened. And all the cells in my body that are doing all the things that they're doing, I'm not making that happen. So what's holding it together and making it happen? I could just be mush, right? But I'm not. I have a skeleton. Now, how did that skeleton happen? So it's like, I don't think people, I don't know if they're not thinking that deep. I don't know if they're not allowing their brain to just evolve in that way or what it is. But it's like, I'm not making my heart beat. Like, what's doing that? What's holding it together? I mean, my heart is pumping all the time. I just if I had to do it for myself, I'd be dead, right? I'd forget to pump my heart and I'd be dead, but it's just naturally occurring. Have you heard of living systems? I don't know if that's a
Well, let me. Well, I mean, I understand the concept, but let me address the "I don't beat my heart." You do. You just don't have to do it with conscious, focused attention.
yeah,
And see,
that's right. It's automatic. Yeah,
that's different. That's different states of consciousness, right?
right. Yeah.
For instance, the centipede, that's
Mhm.
moving, or the millipede that's moving hundreds of legs simultaneously, right?
Uh-huh.
If you ask the centipede, well, how do you do that? Right? And he's like, well, I just do it. Just like if I ask you, well, how do you open and close your hand? You don't like, you may be able to give me some physiological explanation about nerve impulses from the intent originating in the brain moving down the arm, and contracting certain muscles, and whatever. But the reality is, you just open and close it. You don't have to
Yeah.
think about it. You don't have to put
No.
conscious focused attention in how you do it. And even the
Right.
Hindus have, within their belief system, they have a allegory of some kind, where someone asks, probably the Brahman, it may be Shiva or Vishnu, I don't know, but it's, well, how do you uh, how do you maintain the universe? Like, how are you doing all of this all at once, right?
Yeah.
How are you, you know, moving the stars and turning the galaxies, and how is and creating life, and how is this all happening? How do you do this? And his answer is, I just do it. you know, it's again, it's it's not something I have to think about. It's part of my being. So just like
Yeah.
your
It's
heart beating isn't something you have to think about and you have to give
yeah.
conscious attention to, it's part of your being. And
Yes.
I would even say that the making of your body, like the way I see it, this is my way of looking at things, is that your DNA, which is the foundation of your body,
Hmm.
or of your entire physical being, is a product of you, not the other way around.
Hmm.
Meaning, the DNA is a manifestation of your true self, of your true authentic being, right? And
Hmm.
so the DNA is a projection of your consciousness, and it becomes the physical body. Not, you have this DNA and it makes you who you are. No, you are who you are, and you made your DNA the way that it is because of who you
Uh-huh.
are.
Oh, that makes sense. I kind of like that actually. You know what it reminded me of when you said it, or the vision that came to me is kind of like when you hold a stone and then the light like hits it, right? And then the rainbow comes out. It's like And it's funny because I have models like this where, and I was reading something that I wrote the other day about light and obstruction and the light obstruction. And, it perhaps being like the stone, and then the light gets through it, and then we project out into this world, who we be or whatever. That's just kind of what I got. Almost like this, like a film projector. That's kinda like the visual I got. It's like the DNA would be like the real, like it's already there, the image is already there, and then we put light in it through the projector, and then the image is like there on the wall or something. I don't know, that's the image
Right.
I got when you said that. It just went boom like that. So, okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No, no, that's I didn't have anything specific.
Okay. You know me, I'm just like, "Oh, I go off." But that is the image I got, and I'm like, "Oh," and if you kinda look at DNA, it kinda looks like a film projector in a way, the way it's kinda like the film. Hmm,
Well,
I
it
kinda
definitely takes on that infinite,
Uh-huh,
like some of the infinite principles, right? So there's a
uh-huh.
duality, right? There's two strands and they spiral,
Yeah,
so there is
uh-huh,
definitely some universal principles at work there, that
yeah,
it's definitely trying to show us something. And then again, when you take into consideration like the telluric lines and things like that, we know that there's this spiraling of energy that occurs when
mhm,
you have energy that engages or exchanges or interacts with other energy, right? So lines of
mhm,
force, if they cross, you have a spiraling of energy. Um, and we experience in the macrocosm and in the microcosm this constant motion of
mhm,
moving in a circle or moving in spirals and things like that. So there's definitely something universal being portrayed there. And then of course the way I see the light kind of conversation is, and again, this would go to my own theories and philosophies
sure,
around gravity and light and things like that. Like my philosophy on gravity
mhm,
is that it's a direct reciprocal of light, and that light isn't constant, like we believe the speed of light to be constant. It is
yeah,
either accelerating or decelerating. Okay.
mhm,
And
mhm,
so as light decelerates towards the center of a light field, and a light field could be a planet, it could be an atom, the deceleration of that light creates the phenomenon we know as matter, right?
mhm,
So it gives
mhm,
physical properties to the universe when
mhm,
light decelerates.
mhm,
And in
mhm,
fact, I think at some point science will realize that what we call electrons and protons and neutrons and things of that nature are really just photons, what we call photons, at
mhm,
different spin ratios, different decelerated rates from their accelerated rate that we see as visible light or
mhm.
invisible light. So it's this
Well, that
relationship
makes sense.
that gravity, as
Mhm,
light is decelerating,
mhm,
we know that gravity accelerates, right? It gets to a higher rate of acceleration the closer you get to the center of the light field. So for instance, the gravitational acceleration rate in Death Valley is higher than the gravitational acceleration rate on the top of Mount Everest.
mhm,
And so again, this is light decelerating as it
mhm,
goes towards the center of the planet. Gravity accelerates. So I believe they're
mhm,
actually, again, polarities. They're a
mhm.
phenomenon that goes together. You don't have light without gravity and gravity without light.
And that actually would make sense with the time thing as well, actually, when you think about it.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
time,
Because
because time is a big thing, right? So time slows as gravity accelerates.
right.
Hmm. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Because you know me, I have my theories too, and light and all this stuff. And and I'm wondering how that would fit into. I don't know if you've ever heard of a guy named Walter Russell. He
Oh
was
yeah.
okay. Well, I love him, and I have his books and stuff. And he talks about light, and it's kind of funny because that's his whole thing is light. And he said they got it wrong. He just talks about physicists, and he was trying to like challenge them, even though he wasn't. Um, but I literally have his books, and I started reading, and he sees things the way I do. Like I feel when it comes to light and all that stuff, like I kind of I can get on board with what he's doing more than anybody else when it comes to light, because time, right, and matter, like, together, like, I'm like, "No, I don't think they have it right." And I think that maybe I'm gonna have to look at the models that I have. Maybe I'll pass them through you, then you could just look at them and tell me what you think, because I'm like, something's not right with the way that they're looking at it as well. And he has the I don't know if you have his books, but he has these charts and models that I've had, like, insight or foresight, like, I get sacred geometry kinda comes to me, like, the way things and patterns work and stuff like that, and kinda the way he has it laid out is the way that I actually saw it, and I was like, "Oh, I think this guy's a little closer to what I think is correct than, what science is currently doing, or the worldview that they have right now, or how they're trying to talk about light and time and matter and stuff."
Right.
Because
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
I would say that I no longer have any books by Walter Russell. That's something I studied about 25 years ago,
Uh-huh.
but it's definitely contributed to my
Uh-huh.
philosophy. Just same as like
Yeah.
his
Mhm.
work, the work of like Bruce Cathy.
Uh-huh.
These are things that I was studying, approximately 25 years ago that
Uh-huh.
have contributed to my worldview and
Mhm.
contributed
Mhm.
to the way I perceive
Uh-huh.
the nature of reality to be,
Uh-huh.
right?
Uh-huh.
So
Mhm.
it's and I think it's valuable. I think it's valuable to look at as many sources of information as you can and then just be discerning with the
Uh-huh.
information
Mhm.
and then of course having the courage to develop your own
Mhm.
philosophy. I
Mhm.
think one of the most detrimental things to if not to humanity to critical thinking is our need to adopt
Uh-huh.
a an acceptable worldview, belief system, or whatever else. Um, I think that's hindering us more than anything. If
Absolutely.
everyone kind of took it upon themselves to come up with their own philosophies and then we could get together and have discussions, um, our advancement as a species would be, off the charts because we'd be
Um,
constantly tickling new ideas and coming
uh-huh.
forward and moving forward and expanding consciousness as opposed to like locking ourselves into a way of being.
Yeah.
That's why as a philosopher I most likely will never publish my philosophy because then I'm stuck with it. like then I'm stuck with it and I gotta defend it now.
You're that guy.
And yeah, I don't want to be that guy. And so because I look at all the philosophers like,
Yeah.
like whether it's Socrates or Plato or Heidegger
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
anyone else, it's like they publish their philosophy and it's like, okay, well now you got to stand behind it. Now you got to defend it. Um, and it's like it may not be that great a philosophy. There may be problems with it, but
Sure.
it's harder to see it once you've put it out there and because our tendency is to identify
Uh-huh.
as our ideas as our work and it's like you've solidified an identity when you've published something like this.
Yeah, it's
And so
true.
now yeah, so an attack on it you feel like is an attack on you, it's because you identify as it, so it's like yeah, you're going to defend it. And there may be you'll be much more open to shifting and changing and altering a philosophy
Mhm.
if you don't identify with it. For one, if it doesn't have a rigid structure and you don't identify with that rigid structure, right? So my philosophy is something
Uh-huh.
that's very dynamic. It's like
Yeah.
water.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
moving and
Yeah.
changing and evolving with
Uh-huh.
time.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Absolutely, because you get new information. Like, we can't hold the ultimate truth. So, you know what though? I That's really cool because I do have my philosophy and I won't publish it. It's kind of like I have a black book that I keep where I keep kind of my notes, my stuff, and I kind of like trying to understand that. And you said it perfectly. And I've said this on my podcast millions of times, like getting people to the point where we can have these type of discussions. Right. And it was hard because I'm like, I don't want to just be talking. Like, it's nice to have another person come in and talk about stuff. And then also it's like, oh yeah, okay, I didn't think about it that way. Or, oh, now that adds a little bit more to my philosophy or to my understanding of the world. And then I can just add it in, right? But getting people to that point, you know, that's what's needed, I think, right now. That's what I've been telling people, like, this is what's needed. These dialogues are what's needed because there's not really a narrative right now, and they're just trying to recirculate old narratives, like, for control. But how do we get people to start thinking, you know, this way and having these conversations and these dialogues? It'd be nice to have a think tank of people that can actually, have these dialogues. And it's not a, "Hey, I have the right answer." It's more of a, "Oh, I didn't think of it from that perspective. That's interesting. How can that add to value to what I'm up to?" And but, I don't know, are we there? Do we have people who are can, dialogue this way? Or what do you think it's going to take? Cuz I feel like that's where I want to be. Those are the type of people that I want to surround myself with, are people that are able to dialogue in this way so that we can start to say, "Hey, things are different, things are shifting, things are changing." Maybe new language is needing to be created, or maybe new models and structures are needing to be designed and looked at and deconstructed and reconstructed. So I don't know. Tell me what you think about that. Like, how do we get people to start perhaps thinking this way or moving in this direction?
Well, first of all, you have to take into consideration where we're at, right, as a culture. And I
Mhm.
spoke about the dark night of the soul of a
Mhm.
culture, right, of a
Mhm.
society, and I think that's a necessary step because you get wrapped up in the mythology of yourself, right?
Mhm.
This image that you procure and curate and have bought into yourself
Mhm.
is the biggest obstacle. You could create, schools and academies and TV shows and everything else to try to convey what you're talking about, but it'll have little to no impact because people are trapped.
Mhm.
Um, However, the delving into the abyss
Uh-huh.
of that dark night of the soul as a society will be an opportunity to realign with principles, to realign with our true nature, right? Our authentic selves.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so that I think it's something like that will need to occur
Mhm.
because then when you emerge as a society, there is a freshness of view, there is a willingness to search and to seek and to understand. Um, right now, you just have people, for the most part, locked in to a state of
Yeah,
consciousness, and there's not much
yeah,
hope of getting them out.
I know. I hear you. I mean, that's a perfect way to say it. I'm sure I've said it a million times in different ways, but I say it's a trap narrative, but like you said, it's consciousness. I kind of say it's like Plato's cave. You know what I mean? It's almost like it's almost like the smoky mirrors or not. And I think you're right. I think going into the abyss, the black hole, which in tarot, right, that the high priestess is like, "You got to come through me," which is darkness. It's that void. It's not light. People think it's light, and it's not. It's the void. It's almost, and I was talking about it, it's almost like you don't know what you don't know. I was talking about that yesterday
Yeah,
'cause you didn't come on. And then of course, a lot of the stuff, the material that I learned from you, I always talk about, right? Because it at least gives the language to help facilitate like a transformation, or a talk about transformation. So, I think that you don't know what you don't know. I think that is the big place to be, where we can't say we hold the truth or we know the truth, and that this is the only truth we can live, because it's obviously it's not, and it's falling apart bit by bit. And so
right,
it's kind of like, well, where do we get this? And I don't even know, it's not, I wouldn't say it's new information, but it's a different way to look at the information, a different way to view it, to explore it, to understand it. And, you know, it's really hard because I'm like, come on, people. And I try to, I try, maybe it's my language too, in terms of like, how do we speak, or how do I speak to, the masses, right? Where it's language that at least gets the ignites something within their head to be like, oh, let me look at this from a different perspective. It's not always just black and white. There's like this whole other, it's like the paranormal that you were talking about. There's like this in between space that holds some kind of a new way of seeing the world, a new way of molding the world, and being able to have your philosophy and understand how the world works within, the stuff that you understand. So I don't know. I don't know what it is. I
I don't
don't
know if
know.
that's the I don't think if that I don't know if that's the most significant conversations to be having.
Uh-huh.
Um, and the reason I say that is
Uh-huh.
that I always have to, my question, and I think
Mhm.
questioning everything and questioning everyone is, where you start.
Mhm.
But my question is, well, what's the result? What's the
Mhm.
outcome that you're
Mhm.
out for? Like for
Mhm.
me, a conversation that I think is worthy and worthwhile in this day and age and in this place
Mhm.
is the conversations of morality, because
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
completely decayed and falling apart, and it is the social fabric upon which civilization is built,
Mhm.
and there's just a complete lack of it, and a
Mhm.
lack of principles and values,
Mhm.
and there's this rampant false virtue that is in fact amoral in its nature and character. So
Mhm.
I think the conversation of morality and
Mhm.
just questioning,
Mhm.
if you want to lift someone out of their, stuck,
Mhm.
ideological, possessed state of mind, the
Mhm.
best thing is to do is to question things, right? So, like,
Mhm.
for instance,
Sure.
people claiming being offended by things, right? Being offended by people's actions, being offended by certain words, being offended by a comedian's act, right?
Mhm.
What do you mean by offended?
Right.
Explain that to me. I don't want the definition. I don't want the dictionary definition. I want you to explain to me your experience of being offended at
Uh-huh.
Dave Chappelle's joke,
Yeah.
right? Explain to me that experience,
Yep.
and
Yep.
then because
Uh-huh.
once someone, because a lot of times people don't look at or examine their own ideas,
Mhm.
their
Yep.
own
Yep.
they just regurgitate talking points, whether
Yeah.
it's the talking points of the mainstream narrative or whether it's the talking points of their religion or belief system or their elect group, right? They just regurgitate, they don't examine,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
your questioning will
Mhm.
will have that effect. It's like, oh, now
Mhm.
I'm now you're now I have to question
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
the
And then
things that
take
come out of my mouth.
responsibility for my experience,
Right. And
which
if
is
people are just spitting out all these platitudes and things like that, like,
uh-huh.
people
Uh-huh.
spit out like a phrase like, oh, it's win-win. Okay, explain that to me. Explain the win-win here, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like it just gets spit out. It has no depth or meaning
Uh-huh.
or
Yep. Yep.
substance to it. People just
Yep.
spit out these things, and
Yeah.
as a because in reality, being in the question for yourself is a powerful
Mhm.
place to be, because it's like,
Absolutely.
okay, I have what I think you mean when you say that, right? And see, my
Right.
tendency, like, for me, it's a great tool, because my tendency would be to just go off on someone, right? To just like verbally like tear them apart, tear their arguments apart. Um, but that impulse comes from my presupposition of an understanding of what they're saying, right? And so it's like a time to take a deep breath for me, like, oh, explain that to me, because now I could take a deep breath and not be triggered and take off on them verbally.
Oh my God, Brandon, how many times have you wanted to take off on me?
How many times have I? Forget
A
about thought
few.
about. I've done it.
You have a few times, I would say, in the training space, right? Where it was true. I didn't know how to describe what I was trying or the way I was feeling or experiencing, which I think is valuable. I think that's a great start. I think you're correct, which I think we do in life coaching, which I still coach people, and it is being in a question, and it is asking, describe, explain, embody, what is your body feeling, how, where are you feeling it in your body, what does that mean to you, all those big questions. I think you're absolutely correct, because as you said, they get to describe it with their own language rather than saying, "Hey, let me project this idea onto you," or "Let's talk about this and that." And then, they're just giving all these ideas instead of taking like responsibility or personal responsibility for the experience they're having, which I think that's then when the new dialogue actually emerges, right? Is in your own understanding of your experience and how you relate to it, and also what we take personal, which is big. And for those of you that don't know that are on here, Brandon was my coach. And I still call him my coach. He still is my coach, which let's just say this. He didn't really at the end of his coaching, he didn't really have to ask me any questions because I would just talk myself in circles until I realized he's a really good listener. My running joke with Brandon is I would talk and he would walk away, and then he'd come back and I'd still be talking. And I'm sure that might have been the case, which was fine. Because like we do have the answers. We do know. It's just I think part of it is like all of these things that society puts on us, like shame and not feel like we don't have a voice or getting cut off at the throat. And that was a lot of my problem, is that I felt like I was cut off at the throat, and then I was afraid to cry. And so the crying really helped me to like overcome that, the throat chakra where everything would just get stuck out of fear of being stupid or someone thinking I was stupid, right? Which then be daddy issues or whatever, right? We can go into the whole thing, but really not honoring the value that I bring to the table, and are feeling like it wasn't valuable, and or people wouldn't find value in it, or they would, whatever it is. And now this is where the transformation comes from, and I talk about it, and even in one of my classes I talked about it, is I have this, I suck at spelling. But for me, so I used to get this like anxiety. I was like, please don't make me be a scribe, even as a professional, right? Because sometimes we'd have these retreats and they'd be like, Natalie, come and write. And I'm like in front of a bunch of professionals and I'm like, oh my God, they're going to know I don't know how to spell. This is really bad. I would have all this anxiety. And now I just take ownership of it. Like literally, I'll get up there and I'll be like, look, I'm not the best speller. You guys are going to have to help me. And then I just laugh and I say, daddy issues. We're not going to talk about it. And then people just laugh, right? And I just own it for what it is. And then people feel like, and then it's funny because what happens, and I this is what I loved about the transformational work too, is that when you're vulnerable and you're authentic, then it opens up the space for others to do it. And literally what'll happen when I do that is other people say, I can't spell either, so don't feel bad, we'll help you. And then I have this collective support of individuals who are like, we got you, rather than just getting up there and scribbling and then hiding it, and then having people like be like, what is going on with you? And then me like projecting all this anxiety on other people. So, but I think it is powerful. So I think you're absolutely correct. I think it is a valuable conversation to have with people. Like, what is your experience? What's coming up? And then, helping people transition into like just really owning it. And
Right. And it's
two,
important to take every well, take yourself lightly at least,
yeah,
and bring
exactly.
some humor to things,
Yeah.
because actually disarms,
Uh-huh.
that triggering experience
Uh-huh.
that people have with certain
Uh-huh.
experiences. Um,
Uh-huh.
so for instance, I one of my a saying I'll say that goes along with that is, the angels fly because they take themselves lightly. And
Uh,
I don't know if you remember, there we were in a debrief in a
uh-huh.
training,
Uh-huh.
and Gingy had used the word bitch, and you got offended, right?
Right?
And
Oh my god, okay,
it,
tell me, I like to hear the
y-
story.
okay, you got offended and were
Uh-huh.
like in a huff, right? And do you remember how I disarmed that situation?
You know what? I don't remember, Brandon, so let's see, because 'cause you're the brains. Tell me, what
I,
happened?
s- I said, I go, yeah, Gingy, I go, bitches hate it when you call them bitches. And then everyone laughed, right? So it's again, remember the whole meaning is something you project. Meaning is something you bring.
Right,
Nothing inherently has any meaning. The word
right.
bitch is just a word. It's
Uh-huh.
not offensive. You may choose to take offense to it,
Right. Right,
But
right, right,
it
right.
in and of itself, it doesn't have any inherent meaning. We give
Yeah.
it meaning, and you
Yeah.
can choose to, be offended by it or whatever. But that was my whole point. I was taking it lightly, right?
Right.
I
Right.
made it a joke, right?
Right.
So not only did I make the word itself a joke, I made you into the word that 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 you were offended by, you know. And so it's like, I mean, and I don't think negatively of you. I hold you in high regard. I love you.
Yeah.
So that you can only take that one way, which is like Brandon's fucking around, right?
Yeah. 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 Yeah, that's true. Like it's like what the horse is a horse. Like if you're not a horse, it's kind of like the asshole. If you're not an asshole, you're not going to take it. But if you keep hearing it, you got to be like, well, maybe I am, or maybe I'm not. I don't know. But it's true. And I think with so a big thing that a big takeaway too, and I think this is important, and I think this does help with like the majority of people is the triggers, right? And understanding and how to debate and how to hear other people's side of the story. And I will tell you this, people were listening to the podcast about, you know, the whole abortion way Roe versus Wade and all that. And I literally was just trying to understand politics. And I had put some stuff up. They took offense. They didn't know whatever, but a couple of people, because you got on and you have a different way of looking at that situation, right, than I do. And so, but I'm not going to say, well, I need to argue. I just need to understand somebody who can put it in a way that makes sense to me, that's grounded, that, because listening to people just follow the masses doesn't make sense. And of course, you, Brandon, you're going to analyze it, pick it apart, tell me why, blah, blah, blah. I already know how you work. So I'm like, okay. And so, so, but when you said this is why, and you picked it apart, I wasn't mad at you. I wasn't trying to argue. I was like, okay, I get it. And I understand why. And now I can get on board and see it from a different perspective. And let me tell you, people were like, thank you for looking. I had some of my viewers thank me for actually hearing it out, you know what I mean? And listening
Right,
to what perhaps an opposition would be like, but I don't need to argue it. I don't need to change your mind. I don't have to change your mind. I understand. It's like I can respect you and honor you for who you are and why you think the way you think. And that's fine. But so I think that that's it, and it's the triggers that people get. And I notice too when my triggers come up, right? When people are like they say I'll say something and then they'll say something back and then I'm like, "Well, they're not getting what I'm saying. So how can I be mad at them when I'm not articulating it the way that I mean it?" Because the response that I got back was not what I was trying to portray outward. And rather than getting upset with them and firing back, I'm like, okay, let me see if I'm articulating it correctly. Maybe I need to change the words, or maybe I'm using a word out of context or whatever. Um, and then I can shift it and shape it and say, no, this is actually what I meant without getting triggered by it, but I do get
right,
triggered, and I
right.
notice those triggers. Yeah, yeah.
But
So I think that's
but see, there's a my experience in that particular subject is different because for me it's a moral issue,
sure,
right?
got it.
So
No,
because there's a
absolutely.
morality there,
Sure,
I
sure.
am of the mindset that, like, yeah, I do need to change your mind. You
Yeah,
know what I
yeah,
mean? Because
sure,
it's like I see it from a moral standpoint. So for me, morality is something to take a position on. Okay.
sure.
Remember,
Absolutely.
remember I had a whole distinction on taking a position, being a
Sure.
stand, right?
Uh-huh,
And
absolutely.
taking a position creates conflict because if you take a position on something, well, there's a counter position. Well, on moral issues, I am more than willing to take a position on and be in conflict over it. You know
Okay.
what I mean? I'm
And that's
willing
yeah,
to go head to head against someone who is, in my assessment, immoral or taking an immoral position, right?
yes,
So that's something that
absolutely.
I'd be willing to be in conflict over. So it's for me, it's a completely different place because it is tied to morality. Whereas for you, if it's not tied to morality, yeah, you don't have to change anyone's mind on something, but that's there is this amorphous or vaporous kind of relationship with morality in our society, and it's detrimental, it's
Mhm.
destroying society.
Sure,
And I think if we don't have clear values and principles and a clear morality, then will experience what we're experiencing, which is the destruction of civilization.
Right.
I think it's important. I think it's important to have a morality, and I think it's important to take a position on
Mhm.
moral issues,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
to be in conflict with those who are opposed. So again, to me, it's like that. Um, something that's simple for people to take a position on may be torture, right?
Mhm.
Like, it is wrong to torture people, whether they're
Mhm.
guilty of a crime or not, right?
Mhm.
So we shouldn't torture, right? Like, that's a moral issue, and I'm willing to take a position on it and argue with someone who thinks, oh no, that's probably the best way to teach them a
Mhm.
lesson is to torture them,
Mhm.
you know?
Sure.
So that's something that's a moral issue. So that's an argument that I'm willing to have. That's a conflict I'm willing to be in.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. That yes, I will take a stand and I will actually defend what I feel is moral or immoral. For sure. Absolutely. Do agree with you on that point. Um, to the moral issue of what's going on currently, that's not, I mean, I'm not gonna sit here and take a position right now. And I'm not gonna argue with you, but in the point of doing or arguing or whatever, when you say argument, I think people see it from a different understanding, because people tend to think arguments bad, and I'm
No,
just saying that
argument's constructive. I mean,
I
at least
know.
a well-formed
um,
argument is very constructive,
yes,
because
yes.
you've got opposing views, right?
Uh-huh.
And so you bring to the floor opposing views. You compare, you contrast, you criticize. Like, that's an important feature of human relationship, is the
Sure.
argument. The argument
Absolutely.
is how we gain wisdom, right?
Mhm.
So you
Mhm.
argue your position, and
Mhm.
another argues their position, and in arguing your position, you defend it, right? You ground your
Mhm.
assessments,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
you may
Mhm.
criticize or pull apart the assessments of another, or the lack of substance or grounding to their assessments. So
Right.
that's an important process.
I
That's how
know.
we gauge the merit of an idea. It's how we gauge the merit of someone's actions, right? It's why what's interesting about morality is that it's completely subjective. It can never be made objective. Trust me,
Mhm.
I tried for years to develop a philosophy around an objective way of determining morality. Can't be done. But we also have to recognize that there is just as much value in the subjective as the objective. And I think that's
Uh-huh.
why we are averse to morality, because it's this issue that can't be made objective. You can't put together a formula to determine morality. And so the argument is the way that we, like, I mean, that's what they even call it in court, right? When you're on trial for something, there are arguments
Mhm.
to,
Mhm.
your guilt or innocence, to
Yep.
your punishment and everything else, where we need to argue, because this is a moral issue. Now, we're assuming this is a real crime, like you've actually hurt someone or done damage to someone. And so the arguments must be made, because it's not formulaic. We can't just apply, this to X and this to Y and get that, well, this is his sentence. Like,
Yeah.
there needs to be an argument there, and the argument's important. And this is how all morality is. Like, we could say in general, it's bad to kill someone. However, if the situation or scenario is that there is an armed person threatening the life of my children, I will gladly blow them away
Right. Absolutely.
without any qualms. And to me, that's a moral decision. Like, that is within my morality and values. But to just walk up to someone on the street and shoot them in the head, that is, it seems to be the same thing, if analyzed purely on the physical uh experience, right? Like, someone shoots another person, okay?
Right.
If that's all we have, and we try and we just have a formula for, oh, you shot a person, boom, here's the formula, you're going to prison for life, you know um but again, you have to argue. You have to gauge the merit of my actions based on the situation and the scenario. That's why it's this completely subjective thing, but it's a process we must go through. And our aversion to argument, our aversion to discernment, our aversion to critical thinking is why we're having this collapse in society, is
Mhm.
because we're not willing to gauge the merit, right? Everyone's living in this relativity that, oh, that's your truth. That's, you think that's right. Oh, okay, then it's right. No, no. It's not relativity, and relativeness is not the way you make a moral decision on something, right? We must gauge the merit of our morals, of our values, of our principles, and of the actions or words of others or ideas of others, right? That's judgment. We must engage in judgment so that we can, and again, this is purely subjective. There is no factual or logical or necessarily reasonable basis to the assessment itself, but we use those as processes, right? We use reason, we use logic, engaging the merit, of, is this good, is this bad, is this right, is this wrong, just living in relative, oh, there is no right or wrong, and oh, there is no good or bad. Now again, there there is some credence to that, in that we all have an individual perspective, right? So we all interpret the world through our own worldview, and so we all do interpret things differently. So there is an element of relativity there. However, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't engage in this process of argument and discernment to uncover the merit and recognize that there is merit, that not all ideas are equally valuable,
Yeah,
not
but
all
see, and then
actions
it's,
are
and
equal.
this is the hard part, because getting people to understand, because here's they think arguments are, let me give you my opinions and let me just not hear the other side, or listen to the other side, or try to pick apart. So people don't have this process, is basically what I'm saying. They don't use this process. And I think that, so then how do you get there, right? If nobody's using this process, except maybe I think the courts, right? And
Well,
Brandon and all his friends.
yeah, even there, it's tenuous, because in reality, a lot of what you see is procedure. A lot of what we call law now and justice is a procedural uh, unfolding, as opposed to actual arguing the morals or merit
Mm,
of someone's actions.
yeah.
Um, it's kind of gotten away from that. Now you may have some, and it'll be more of your old school judges who that's what they're attempting to elicit from the advocates, right? They're trying to get
Mhm,
the attorneys, like, to argue the merit of their position, right?
mhm,
Or to demonstrate the nature of the contractual relationship between the parties, right? And
mhm,
because the nature of the true nature of a contract is the actions of the parties, and so a judge is always looking to ferret out the actions, as opposed to, like, oh, here's the written document. The written document is a memorialization. It's not
mhm.
the contract. The
Right.
contract is the understanding of the parties and their actions in relations to each other. So that's something that must be assessed, right? So this is,
Yeah.
again, it requires judgment. It requires assessment. It's not something we can apply a formula to. The written document may say you promise to pay this amount on this date each month. However, for 6 months, the other party accepted a different amount, and now you're trying to enforce something else. You're trying to enforce what's on the paper, but your actions demonstrated that the contract had different terms.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Uh-huh. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So again, you
Absolutely.
can't you can't be purely objective in that scenario and say, "Oh, well, this is what the paper says. Boom, this is my judgment." That's not how a judge looks at it. A judge is going, "Okay, so you paid him this amount, and sir, what did you do with the checks?" "Well, I deposited them in my bank account." "Okay, acceptance, right? Offer,
Yep.
acceptance. This went
Yep.
on for how long? 6 months." "Okay, that's the contract."
Yep.
Because that's That's the performance of the parties. That's how they interacted with each other.
Right.
So there was offer acceptance, offer acceptance, offer acceptance. So that was the contract. So
Absolutely.
it's an
And
important
I
it's an
think is
important aspect for civilization
I
to
agree.
recognize judgment.
So, but yeah, but then how do you get them there? That's my question the whole time. Okay, it's all great. Now what? Do we hold massive classes of offer and acceptance and contracts?
No,
um,
no, I think it's just important, like I said, to just start questioning and being willing
yeah,
to argue and take a position. Like,
yeah.
that's it.
That's
Like, those
you're
simple things right there, like, and define your moral code. Like, what are your values? Like, get
uh-huh, uh-huh,
clear on that.
yeah.
Like, if you don't have religion, then you don't have a code of morality. Like, at
Hmm.
least you could say what you want about religion, but the one thing that it typically has is a moral code
Yeah,
that
it does.
unites a group of people. That's important to have. Okay, I'm not
Well,
saying you should join any particular religion, but it's important to have a common moral code. Now, again, though, like, the genius and the wisdom I see in the Bible is that it is this huge collection of moral tales. It's like, look, the, we can't look at things as absolute. Like, like in Christianity and Judaism
yeah,
and Muslim or Islam, they have the 10 commandments, right?
uh-huh,
However, those seem like 10 really simple rules, right?
yep.
However, you have this entire book dedicated to stories on, well, here's how we handle it here, here's how we handled it here, here's how we handled it here, because it's not absolute, it's not objective, it can't be universally applied, it's not formulaic. So it's a recognition of our approach when we choose to have values, when we choose to be moral people. Circumstances and conditions are going to unfold that are going to not only challenge our faith and morality, but they're going to call from us, necessitate, demand from us attention and judgment. We need to assess this
Mhm.
particular situation and how is the best. And see, I'm using all these judgment words, right? These aren't objective words,
Yeah.
right? Good, bad, best, better, worse. Like, these are all judgment words. These are assessments, and we must be willing to argue. We must be willing to assess. We must be willing to criticize, because in a world of absolute relativeness, you have none of that. You have no morality. You have no moral code. You have no values, because nothing means anything.
Is that so? Let me ask you a question because okay, and maybe it's not, maybe it's totally unrelated, but I this is something I just never understood. I'm sure you kind of might know. Is that kind of like a atheist way of thinking, or no? Am I totally off? I because
No,
atheism.
atheist is just doesn't believe in anything greater. I'd say it goes hand in hand with the mechanistic materialistic worldview,
Okay,
right?
okay.
So typically, and it's funny because Satanists are actually atheists. I don't know if you know this, but
I
an
don't.
atheist
Explain.
and a Satanist and a New Ager almost all have the same belief system, and they just don't realize it.
Okay.
They value the individual. That
Uh
the
huh.
individual is what they worship, the self, I should say, not because they don't worship a particular uh, being or something outside of themselves. They worship the self, right?
Okay.
And they elevate the self as the highest authority, as the highest, uh, because again, they don't believe in God as a concept or idea, and they don't believe in anything greater. So the worship is of the self.
Ah, okay.
This is this is true of basically of most New Age religions or New Age philosophies and of Satanism. And the
Oh,
atheist is basically on the same level, but they just reject doctrine, they reject dogma, they reject the idea of something greater, right? Whereas like an agnostic would be someone who's like, well, I don't know, maybe, you know, they're on the fence, right? It's like, yeah,
yeah.
this seems like it might be true. Um, so that there's there's definitely a, and again, this is what you're seeing manifest in our culture,
Uh-huh.
is the worship of the self, right? So there's this extremely high level of narcissism that we haven't seen since the collapse of the Roman Empire. Okay, so again, if if history is any indication of where we're heading, when you get
Yeah.
extremely narcissistic and self-centered,
Yeah.
shit falls apart. Okay, we've seen it happen before.
Right.
And that's where we're at. I mean, look at who we call celebrities and influencers, and even the average person, right? It's people don't go around taking pictures of monuments and things on their vacations. No, they turn the camera around and take a picture of themselves with the monument,
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And it's a very self-centered, narcissistic, self-worship way of approaching the world. And in that state there, and again, this has been contributed to by this relativeness, right? This there is no absolute truth, there is no absolute morality. Those ideas which made it into our civilization, our society, in the early 20th century have permeated and perpetuated themselves into all institutions. And so,
Mhm.
because they've perpetuated themselves into all institutions, it's become part of the mindset of most people. They've just adopted it, they've taken it on. And when I say all institutions, I mean all. Like, even in religion, you have this relativeness that permeates a lot of the religions where they don't even have a, a connection to any kind of absolute morality or absolute truth as well. And so there is this deconstruction of civilization that occurs, this just disintegration, right? That because the foundation of culture is the values of that culture, and when there are no values, or the values have no meaning, you have nothing that holds it together. You have no more cohesion for a culture, and so it disintegrates. And that's what we're experiencing. We're experiencing the disintegration of culture because there is no morality. Like, even if we say, okay, here's some values, let's argue the merit of the values, like, at least have that conversation. But because there's actually no system of values or absolute truth or anything else in most people's belief systems, it's amorphous. It's contributing to the disintegration. Like,
Mhm.
all the new agers who say, well, I'm not religious but I'm spiritual. Okay,
Mhm.
those people are basically have no moral code of any kind. They may think they have values, but a lot of their beliefs are based on these false virtues, right? And they're, because it's based in relativism, there's no way of gauging the merit. They Gauging the merit of something is in and of itself lost, right? This is the If we talk about the conversation of equity, right? Enforcing equal outcome, which is the most ridiculous principle there is. This completely rejects a meritocracy. It completely rejects that, like, rather than hire someone based on their skill, which is, as an employer, that's all I'm going to do. I
Mhm.
don't give a fuck what your color, race, creed, or anything else is, or sex. I don't care. If you do the job better than all the other people I've interviewed, you get the job.
Mhm.
That's a meritocracy.
Mhm.
Okay. Like, equity is forcing outcomes, saying, well, there's unequal outcome here. And we had this discussion when we talked about culture last week, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it's this idea is completely just abolishing the idea of merit, right? And so, by abolishing the idea of merit, you're no longer going to engage in the practice of gauging the merit or assessing the merit of something, because
Mhm.
your focus isn't on the merit. Your focus is on, well, do we have the right number of people of this color and the right number of people of this color?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it's intentional. Like, this isn't just arbitrary. This is very intentional. Like, these philosophies, these ideologies have at the basis of their intent to disintegrate
Yeah,
society
that's
and culture.
that's what I was just gonna ask you. Is it something that you feel was like forced on us or is being played out, or I was just going to ask you that question. So you're already speaking to it. Where it's
Yeah,
like I think you had talked
it's not
about it before. Go ahead.
yeah, it's not necessarily forced. It's just become part of the zeitgeist. It's because
Mhm,
it's
mhm.
been propagating since the early 20th century, it's everywhere.
It
And
was
so now,
intentional, basically what I meant to say. It was intentional.
yeah, it was very intentional. It was
Okay.
very intentional. It was
Okay.
basically the neo-Marxists out of the
Uh-huh.
school, the Frankfurt School, brought it to America, and it's infiltrated all of our institutions. And
Was
that's
this
the
played out
intent.
somewhere else before? Oh, yeah, I know you said
What?
Rome or whatever, but has it been like, so that idea, that theory, relativism, right?
Uh-huh.
It arose from what? Like it was being utilized somewhere else prior to?
Well, I would
Or
say
do
the modern emergence of it, you could see in the postmodern theory
Oh,
in
okay.
philosophies.
Okay.
So postmodernism is where
Okay.
it really took hold.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so
Okay.
that's you could point to that, but again, I'd say the influences come from earlier and are
Uh-huh.
again they're very intentional in
Uh-huh.
the outcome that they're directing, right? So
Sure.
it's not that like postmodernism in and of itself is bad or wrong. It's just it latched onto something that is intentionally designed to undermine a
Got
culture.
it. Got it. Got it. And it was intentional. So, and the people that brought it, because you said Frankfurt, you keep talking about, explain that to me. Like, who do you know specifically, or what it was, or the group, or the individuals that
Oh yeah,
were?
if you could do a Google search on the
Okay.
Frankfurt School, and it was a bunch of
Okay.
neo-Marxists out of Germany who
Oh, Germany.
basically
I
had to
can't
come to
remember.
America
Uh-huh.
because probably because of the rise of Nazism.
No.
Um, but they because Nazis were it's funny they were very anti-communist because they were nationalists. And so you have this, whereas communism is kind of like, oh, it's John Lennon's Imagine, you know what I mean? No borders, no religions, it's all just cool, man. That's communism, right? Or at least Marxism.
Uh-huh.
And I should say the Marxist flavor of communism.
Uh-huh.
So that goes against the idea of a nation state, right?
Mhm.
So the nationalists, which is what um, the Nazis were very opposed to it. So they probably got booted or just like saw the writing on the wall and like, dude, we better get the hell out of here. Or we're going to be, on a train bound for somewhere. So they made it into America.
Okay.
But again, this is the actual action steps behind the philosophy on deliberately undermining a culture and destroying a civilization were spelled out by what's his name? Yuri Bezmenov. He was a former KGB agent who defected to the United States and in the 80s was telling people like, look, here's what it looks like. And if you go through his interview from the 80s and he's explaining step by step, he's explaining it from firsthand experience like, look, this is how we destroyed societies so that we could implement our communism in other countries, right? He
Mhm.
spells it out step by step. First, you do this, then you do this, then you do this. Go listen to that interview. And what you're going to see is, oh, that's everything we're experiencing now.
Okay.
Like step
Uh-huh.
by step by step by step, they're following it. It's like a formula.
Got it. Got it, got it, got it. Okay, cool, and that's good to know, and that's good information to have, and that's something that I'd be interested in because, again, I know you say, like, we have to know both, right? The macro, micro, and how it all plays out and all that stuff, and it does play out in politics and theories and ideas and all that kind of stuff, and I don't that's the part where I lack the most is, like, understanding, you know, communism, fascism, which were things that I was like, I wanted to talk about, but obviously not on this podcast. We went to non-ordinary states of consciousness, but to understand like what do these things mean? How do they play out? Because I don't really understand that. And it's something that I get to start to look into because I need to understand, like, how do I dialogue? How do I support? How do I, um, I can't, like, for instance, if I did, let's say, for instance, there was an argument, and like you said, I'm grounding. I wouldn't be able to even ground any assessment when it comes to political stuff. Like, I'd be all, I don't know, I don't even know what that means. I have no clue. I don't know what you're talking about, so I can't really argue, or I have no clue. I would be
Right,
like,
but you
yeah,
can be in the question of, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
especially if you were on the
yeah,
outside of two people arguing two opposing positions, because
sure,
then you could be like, you can ask each of them, "What do you mean by that? And what do you mean by that?
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
could you tell me more about this? Could you tell me more about that?" Like,
uh-huh,
and what's funny is you will actually, even though you have no position on, because you have no understanding of it, because of how you're engaging in the argument, you're going to bring further illumination and understanding to all parties, not
yeah,
only the parties arguing, but anyone witnessing it. You know what I
uh-huh,
mean? Because
yeah.
we get rid of the presuppositions, right? Like, let's stop assuming and presuming we know what anyone's talking about. You
I
know what I mean?
agree. Thank you for saying that. I just put a meme out there like that. Okay, go ahead.
But that's just it. Like, just take that very simple approach. Like,
Uh-huh,
you don't have to necessarily understand the intricacies of the historical significant events and people like I do. That's not important. What's important is to, like, not just take on and adopt some ideology. It's to question every aspect of it,
uh-huh,
and
uh-huh.
to play it out in your mind, like, well, if we do that, won't this happen? Like,
Yeah.
asserting it as a question, you know what I mean? Like, it seems to me like this would lead to that, or, if we do that, wouldn't that be racist? Like, if people were
Right,
actually questioning things right now, everyone who's claiming to be anti-racist are perpetuating racism, right?
right.
But nobody's questioning it. They're just going along and regurgitating talking points. But it's
Yeah,
like you should question it. You're like, well, if you do this and you say that, isn't that racist? Like, to me,
right.
that's racist. Like, I grew up understanding racism to be when, you know, you judge a race, you judge an individual based on their race, you make statements about race as a generality, right? Like, these things were racism, right? And they're trying to redefine it. They're trying, again, their their arguments are completely incoherent and have no substance. And so what they're doing is perpetuating confusion. So your best approach is to be get through the confusion. Like,
Yes.
start to discern, start to, like, lay it out on the table, start to break it apart, so that you can, like, identify, like, well, you're saying this, but that doesn't make sense. Like, and being willing to, like, as assert your opinion, your assessment of, like, well, okay, you say this, but the way I see that is racist, or the way I see that is bigoted. Like,
Right.
you're saying this person over here is bigoted, but you're claiming that they have this quality because of their race. So what you're saying is all people of this color are such and so. That to me is racism. You see
Yeah.
what I'm saying? Like, you
Right.
break it down, you pull it apart, you ask the questions, as opposed to, like, just being indoctrinated by an ideology and regurgitating talking points. There's no critical thinking involved in that. And we must be willing to not only argue and take positions, we must be willing to critically think for ourselves, and not, like, because of the worship of self, because people hold self higher than all else. We have a society and a culture that's decisions are driven by their desire to be accepted, their desire to be liked, their desire to um, be looked at
Mhm,
as
mhm,
virtuous, regardless of whether those virtues have anything to do with a true set of values. You see what I'm saying?
mhm,
So
mhm,
it's, people want, again, they're living this curated image of themselves,
mm.
right? And this is the social media phenomenon. People are starting to believe in their Facebook profile, you know, and
Yeah.
and that's dangerous, like,
Mhm, mhm,
that's not you. You may you may want to convey a certain image of what your life is and who you are to your quote unquote friends, but in reality this is not who you are. This is a curated image of who you are.
Mhm.
And we have an
Mhm.
entire generation that's grown up with this. You know, they don't know life without a social media profile. They don't know life without the curated image of self being what you put out there, and so it's people are just doubling down on the mythology of themselves.
Ah, okay. That kind of makes sense. Now I get it in terms of the relativism, where it came from, how it derived, how it's playing out, why it's playing out. Um and also you're right in the assumption piece. And I did write something the other day about not making I had posted something. Hey Linga, I had posted something on my social media about, I can't remember. It was something about, crucifying, like, it was to a morality. It was like, it takes courage to stand up for what you feel is right, whatever. I don't remember how I worded it, but I said, you know Jesus got crucified for it, right? Because he went against the masses or whatever. And then I'm like, who are you crucifying? And it was a question, but then everybody made an assumption about what it meant. And it was kind of funny to see that happen. I was like, wow, it was a question. Some guy said, well, what are
Right,
you comparing to there and now? I said, that wasn't a comparison. I made a statement and asked a question. I wasn't trying to compare anything. I made a statement and then I
right,
asked a question. And so he had nowhere to go because I was like, I'm not comparing anything to anything. I'm just making a statement. And then somebody went off on, of course, the Roe versus Wade, whatever thing. And I said nowhere in that entire sentence did I mention anything about Roe versus Wade, abortion, or anything like that. I said, so obviously there's some triggers for you. And that's kind of what I put as a friend of mine. I said, you're still triggered by that narrative, obviously, or that conversation, because
hmm,
that wasn't even my mindset, but it was an assumption. And I told him, like, rather than assume, why don't you ask questions? Like, ask me and I'll let you know. But then it's like these assumptions that are made based on their own, I guess, what's going on in their own mind or their worldview or what's happening in their life or what they think you might be trying to articulate. But it's just a question. You know what I mean? And so
right.
I think that's true. Yeah, go ahead.
No, no, no.
Go ahead.
You're right on. That's that
Mhm,
people
mhm,
project meaning on it,
mhm, mhm,
and that's the problem that a lot of us that I'm not even gonna say a lot of us. I'll say in general that is plaguing society is that
mhm,
we assume and presume, right? And that's
mhm,
why it's so easy because people also, because their highest concern, right,
mhm,
is being
mhm,
liked, being accepted, and being right.
mhm,
Um, they look at, okay, well, what's the popular opinion to have? And
mhm,
again, perceptually, because it may not actually be the popular opinion, it may be the quote unquote popular opinion being perpetuated by a narrative, by the media, right?
mhm, mhm,
And so they're like, oh, well, that's the way to talk about this, that's the way to think about this, that's the position to hold on this. Well, then that's my position.
mhm,
And then they're inundated with the talking points, right? So again,
mhm.
they don't bring thinking to the table on anything. They just have to remember the talking points and spit those out
That
when
sounds like
when
a
when it's
politician.
called for. Yeah. Yeah, and because people are so invested in their curated image of themselves, that's what they are. They're politicians for their image, for the
Oh,
mythology of themselves.
oh my God. Now I'm getting it. See, this is good. This is always good because yeah, that's how it's funny because again, I don't know, like I said, don't know politics. I do know a little when doing tobacco prevention work, right? And just seeing these politicians and literally they'll be like, just give me my talking points. Then they would, like, go online and read a few articles, and for me, it was eye-opening. I mean, I was already older, you know what I mean? I'm like, "Oh my god, these are the people that are running our state?" Like,
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. I was, like, flabbergasted. I was like, "Oh my god, this person literally went online, read an article that who knows where the article came from, gave a bunch of lies, like just straight out said stuff that wasn't even factual, and then said these talking points, and that was it." And I was like,
Uh-huh.
I was like, "Wait, what?" And then okay, then for me sitting there because I was the director of a program, and so I'm sitting there looking at like my face is saying it all. I'm looking at him like, "Are you kidding me?" And then I'm told by this other person like, "Natalie, you got to watch your face." And I go, "Why?" Like these I wanted to get up and say, "What the heck is wrong with you?" And I don't know if I'd have got in trouble for that, but I'm just I mean, it was I was like, "Wow. Like this is how it works. This is how politics works." It's just like you said, regurgitate. And then it is true because they'd be like, "Okay, everybody, we're going to the legislature." And then it would be these kids, and here's your talking points. And then they would just regurgitate talking points. I don't even know if they knew why they were saying those talking points. I just think they were just saying them.
Yeah, no,
Wow.
they were part of this. They were just part of the sales pitch. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
So yeah,
Uh,
there's not there's very little of substance
oh
in the
man.
mainstream narrative in general.
Wow.
Whether you're talking about from politicians,
I
whether it's from
know.
celebrities, it's there's very little substance there.
Oh my God, Brandon, what are we gonna do? Nothing. We're just gonna be. Just kidding. I'm always like the doer. Let's do something. Um, but no, I think it's very helpful, and and I'm very thankful because I'm just like, I don't know how to converse. And I think you said it right. Ask questions. And I think, if someone gets into the dialogue of something rather than, be triggered and think about, well, this is how I see it, rather than that, just be like, well, why do you see it that way? What's making you say that?
Right.
What is your belief? Why do you believe, what position are you taking? And all these questions that,
Right. And be willing to judge it on your own values. First of all, you got to come up and, with a clear idea of at least an initial
Mhm,
set of
mhm,
values because they may evolve because
mhm,
because you must be able to judge the merit of something based on your values and gauge
mhm,
it as, within the scope of your values. Is this good? Is this bad? Is this right? Is this wrong?
mhm,
That's an important thing to be able to do. And you may, over time, your values may change. You may say, yeah, well, I was holding this as a value, but like it's been challenged. And in people challenging it, I kind of see, I see through.
mhm,
And now I have a better way of, I have a better value,
mhm,
to replace it with, or
mhm,
I can let go of this one. So it's 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 something that you must be willing to do because when you're questioning and the answers come, well, how are you gauging the merit? How are you
yeah,
assessing the merit of
mhm,
the answer? Like you have to have a set of values there where it's
mhm,
like, oh yeah, that sounds like a really bad idea. Like, and again, that's an assessment, but you have something you're measuring it on.
absolutely.
You're like, well, here, I value individual liberty and freedom, and
Mhm,
what you're saying goes against that.
mhm,
And
mhm,
so yeah, so
mhm.
I think it's bad. I think that's a bad idea. You
Yeah.
know, so you have to have some set of values, in order to make those assessments and judgments.
Yep. Okay, so here's the big takeaway, people. What are your values? What are your morals? How are you grounding those? How are you assessing? No, I'm just joking. But seriously, it is true. What are your values? What are your morals? And then also understanding they are subjective, like you said, and also understanding that they are open for argument, but argument doesn't have to be um arguing in the way that I think most people do. So it's understanding why you're standing in that why you take that stand in that particular whatever dialogue or conversation or argument, and how you're going to ground your assessments, which I think, okay, I go back to this because it's really good and it's an eye opener for me, because and I think for people in general, and they should understand this, is grounding your assessments. What's fact, what's story, all of those things that you taught me have helped me tremendously, with not just with myself but with my relationships with people just in general, because I'm able to like say, okay, what is fact for me? What is not fact? Why am I taking that personally? I get to like point the question back at myself and then
Mhm.
kind of say, okay, why am I taking this personally? Is it a reason to take personally? Do I want to set a boundary around this person because I feel that I'm disrespected? It's not something that I'm going to do, but understanding that. And I think that those are maybe the tools that people can use. I think they're valuable. And I honestly, Brandon, like all the time, I use your work all the time for sure. And I constantly tell people like, and I used to be like, come on, Brandon, let's do something together. because because I think it's valuable information. And I think that it would help, and it also meets people where they're at, which is, instead of doing these big fancy, like you said, dialogues and narratives, meeting people where they're at so that they can even start to untangle, what did you call it? Possession or possessed
Ideological possession.
yeah, ideological possession, where they can at least start to question and assess and understand why they're thinking this way. Why do
Right.
they? Yeah, I think it's important. Really, really important. Um,
Yeah.
so thank you. It's been honestly, it's I don't think that most people understand that a lot of my ideas as well, which I would say do come from what Brandon says, is not because I don't just follow anybody. This is another thing that I like to tell people: don't just follow anybody. Like, trust me, I have questioned Brandon. I have, I don't know, I've put you through the ringer. I'm surprised you still talk to me. I'm sure I've been a challenge for you. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know.
Well, I no, I don't look at it as, I mean, of course, every relationship has an element of challenge in it, but
Yeah.
I look at it as like I recognize that everyone's on their own path and that everyone's at a different place in their path. Like I mean, I do remember, and and of course I can't help but have judgments on that,
Uh-huh,
but
uh-huh.
I set them aside f- for the benefit of the relationship itself, right? So like
Yeah.
I remember, just a couple years ago, you know, some of the ideas you had and were spitting out, and I was like, to myself, I'm like, oh, I remember when I had those ideas.
Yeah,
Like I
yeah.
remember when I thought that and I believed that and because I had read those books too,
Uh-huh, uh-huh,
I
uh-huh.
had just gotten to the books, 20 years before you did, so it was,
Sure.
but I rather than make you wrong about it, what I would do is question you about it. You know what I
Right,
mean? Like
right.
just kind of like, okay, I'm gonna lay this philosophy bare. I'm gonna expose it and see if it's something you're gonna stick with, which is fine,
Mhm,
that's your path, or if
mhm,
it's something that you're going to grow out of,
mhm,
kind of
mhm,
thing.
mhm. Yeah, and I constantly grow. Like that, and that's for me is I'm open to kind of changing what's and taking out what doesn't make sense anymore. And it is. It's like it's an evolving thing, and that's why I'm never on the same path. And I tell people this, life is about change and transformation. We're never gonna if you're just stuck in one thing, well, you're stuck. Like you had talked about it earlier, just being stuck in the box or whatever. It's like I'm looking at things from a different perspective. I'm hearing, I'm not taking everything on and I'm saying, how does that play out? What does that look like? Because I pick apart everything as well. And I'm like, I don't think this is right. I don't see it that way. Like Young is really huge, right? And of course, in
Jung.
my program, Jung, yeah, he just I appreciate the work that he did, but I don't necessarily agree with every single thing that he says because I'm like, well, I don't see it that way specific, and here's why, and I do challenge, like in my classes, I do challenge, I do say how I feel, and not a lot of the students do. Well, no, none of the students do it except for me. I'm constantly, well, this is I don't see it that way. This is what I think, and then I call it out for what it is, and my professors are like, that's awesome. I'm glad that you saw that. Now here's another book that you can read that kind of talks to that point that you're thinking about. So it is an evolving thing, and you're absolutely right. And the reason why I use a lot of the information that you've given me and why I followed you and why I listen to what you have to say is because you always have this rationale behind it, but you always have at least some grounding as to why you think the way you think. It's not just like willy-nilly somebody else said it. You're like,
Right.
"I've picked it apart. Here's what it is," and then I'm like, "Okay, that makes sense. It makes sense to me."
Right.
So, yeah,
Yeah,
and
there's no unfortunately, there's not one single philosophy out there that I can point to that isn't in some way, shape, or form in contradiction to my own.
right.
Not completely necessarily, um, but like so there is no ideological basis for
Yeah.
my personal philosophy, um, because they all kind of like there's I recognize and I identify problems with everyone's philosophy. And so
Mhm.
when forming my own philosophy, I get rid of that stuff. I'm like, yeah, that doesn't work. Well,
Yeah.
that doesn't make
Right.
sense. Like, so
Right.
I just kind of pick and choose and kind of stitch together my own amalgam
Yeah.
of philosophical principles,
Yes.
and so
Yep.
it's
Yep.
something that's very much
Yep.
my own, but
Yep.
like I said, it's also dynamic. It
Yep.
shifts and changes and moves with time.
Which I love. It's awesome. So good job. Just kidding. Good for you, Brandon. You did it. I'm just you're like, thanks, Natalie. I don't need your congratulations. No. Um, but no, it's and that's kind of and that's exactly why I have you on here because it's like, yeah, it's I tell people like understanding that, right? It's like me, it's like you said, I've evolved, I've come further, like even with the transformational language, all that kind of stuff, it's given me an opportunity to at least explain my experience of the world and then explain why I see it a little bit different than everybody else and then how I see it different and why and then I'm able to construct it in a way that makes sense for me and then also, because it does no harm, it's not here to harm, but to just understand and then it's like oh wonderful I have this like you said my philosophy but I always tell people this is not that's not what spirit and coffee is about. It's not about projecting my what I have to say onto you. It's about people questioning their own and understanding their own and like you said you have your philosophy, you're not going to go publish it but you know it and you've done enough of picking apart everything else to say, yeah, this is what works. And I guarantee, right, Brandon, if you come to this point in your life where you're doing this, you're you're not gonna do harm. Like that's how I see it. Like if individuals operated like that, where they were constantly questioning it, I feel like they're gonna come to a point of like peace and harmony, tranquility, love, balance. I at least that's what I believe. That when people start to question themselves and learn to understand their own experience of the world, they're not gonna be out there shooting people. Like, they're not gonna be harming people. What do you
Oh
I
yeah,
mean, what do you
I
think
mean,
about
in reality, the people out there doing that, and again, this is a product of
that?
our
Mhm,
current civilization and culture is just a mass psychosis, right? There's just
mhm,
mental illness is running rampant. And the culture of psychology is now taking the approach of like, oh, we're just not going to identify mental illness, which is problematic. It leads to many problems.
mhm,
And as opposed to like actually dealing with this mass psychosis in a way that's constructive and can bring people, elevate them out of it, we're just medicating, right?
mhm,
We're just
mhm,
putting people on
mhm,
drugs, and that's not
mhm,
treating the actual problem. The
mhm,
actual problem in most cases stems from a mindset, and
mhm,
a drug isn't going to change your mindset,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
And so that's what we have. We have a culture where we have a high instance of mental illness. We're not approaching the true causes of it, which is
mhm,
the mindset and belief systems and the meaning people attribute to situations, circumstances, conditions. We're just medicating it, right? And that doesn't address the root cause.
mhm,
Um, so that's uh, I don't think necessarily someone who's experiencing mass psychosis or an experiencer of the mass psychosis or some other mental illness is necessarily going to be enlightened, especially if they're medicated by, something you may say on your podcast or something. You know what I mean?
Mhm,
They're,
mhm,
for the most part, they're kind of cut off
mhm,
from the more medicated you are, the more cut off from your higher faculties of consciousness you
mhm,
are.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
And you start to
mhm.
cut people off from that
Yeah.
higher consciousness, and they have become the ideal of the mechanistic materialist, which is a machine.
Mhm.
They don't demonstrate the what makes humans human. They don't demonstrate that spirit, that those emotions. I mean, a lot of these medications completely cut you off
Yeah.
from from your emotions and things like that. So it's kind of a scary thing. um, but I think, again, everyone's on their own individual journey, and so I think people will have an experience. As I think one of the biggest detriments is people medicating themselves out of the abyss of the
Mhm,
dark
mhm.
night of the
Yeah.
soul.
Mhm. Sure, sure,
They
sure.
we do all we can to avoid it, and that, I
Mhm,
think, is very detrimental, and probably a big uh, contributor to the mental
mhm,
illness that we see
mhm,
around
mhm.
us.
I agree. So cutting off, and I think we have like 30 seconds left or something like that.
Okay.
But,
Okay. Good. Let's
awesome.
let's 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 actually intentionally end this and give an outro. Thank you,
Okay.
Natalie, for everything. It was awesome. I had fun.
We'll see Brandon next week. Yes? Yes.
Yes, most likely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll